Welcome to SportsLit. I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nathan Sager.
Today, we're talking to former Toronto Blue Jays manager John Gibbons. On April 4th, he will release his autobiography, Gibby, Tales of a Baseball Lifer, written with author and wrestling columnist Greg Oliver for ECW Press. He leads off Season 7 of SportsLit. Well, we're back for Season 7, Episode 1. And Nate, what have you been doing in the last 2 or 3 months since we spoke with Suzanne Rack to end Season 6?
Oh, looking out the window, waiting for baseball season, and or wondering why Kirk Cousins threw short of the sticks on 4th and 8.
Well, to satiate the first part of what you said, baseball is the topic today. The man we will be speaking to for a generation of Blue Jays fans is the only manager they can associate with real success. That, of course, is John Gibbons. And that's to say, a long-standing skipper whose team knocked on the door of a World Series appearance. Under Gibby, the Jays made the ALCS in 2015 and 2016. Over 2 stints, first in 2004 to 2008, and again from 2013 to 2018, he became the second most tenured manager in team history behind, of course, Cito Gaston, and the second winningest.
Now, this is a real treat for us to get to talk to a career baseball man. Since, Neil, you might not know this about me, but I've been accused of being a seamhead.
You are guilty. No way, Nate.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Anyways, with Gibby, here's a guy who endured, the precarious, never quite secure existence of life in, minor league baseball, because he was basically in the minors for a solid 2 decades, from his intake point, signed out of high school as a first-round draft choice in 1980, through to the end of 2001 as a minor league manager. It was a slog for him and his, family, for him to, get in the door and stay in the show, as they call it.
It started rather unassumingly for him in Toronto when former minor league teammate and roommate J.P. Ricciardi was named the Jays GM ahead of the 2002 season. Gibbons, the one-time Mets prospect who played 18 games for New York, was hired to be the bullpen catcher for the Jays at 39 years old. And that was a reprisal of the role he played as a pro with the 86 Mets, where he's credited with being part of that infamous World Series team.
Yeah, that team was the subject of The Bad Guys 1, which was the first of Jeff Pearlman's 10 books. Jeff, of course, came on with us for Season 4, Episode 3, Three-Ring Circus, which was a description that also could have applied to that famous Mets team.
Absolutely. And Gibby does mention in the book about that flight home from Houston after the 1986 NLCS win, so you can read about that. Gibbons sustained a major injury blocking home plate during his career, and his first foray on a major league staff could have ended that way with that blown out knee. But despite what happened in spring training with the Jays, he was moved to first base coach that same season after Buck Martinez was fired. So almost a bit of luck finally bouncing his way. He held that role until 2004 when maybe a little more luck happens to come his way. Another midseason axing, this time to Carlos Tosca. And this leads him to becoming a major league manager for the first time and finally a chance to make his mark as a pro. And I remember when it was announced, it was kind of like, who is this guy?
Indeed. At any time a rookie manager is going to face skepticism, the old saw in baseball is, he's not an experienced, trusted manager until some other team has fired him. And of course, when you get hired in a major market, there's no idea of what, someone's track record was to get to that point, because, what happens in the minors, is out of sight, out of mind. And the Blue Jays, were in a situation where they had kind of, been, sort of wallowing around the middle of the American League East for a solid decade to that point. So there really wasn't any a lot of trust in the organization at that stage. And as Gibby writes for him, he maybe didn't know how to come across to the public. Maybe he didn't even know that was part of the job to get people on your side. And at that point, I think he was the Blue Jays' fifth manager in less than 7 seasons, and this was an organization that had pretty much been a model of stability for its first 2 decades.
In his new book, written with our second ever guest, Greg Oliver, he has written his life story, which I think many who follow the team would not have expected when he first started. Again, it was such an assuming beginning to his pro managerial career, and he came in with such little gusto, part of another Jays shuffle at a time when they were lost in the abyss that began in the mid-90s, right after they won those 2 World Series, when an ownership change severed any momentum they had to build on the success of back-to-back World Series wins. And I don't think any predicted how it would turn out in terms of his tenure. He was kind of known as a mumbler, and he, seemed a little off in dealing with the press. But in the end, Gibbons' baseball legacy and his life story are based, by and large, on his time in Canada with the Blue Jays. So it's no surprise that it's a major theme in his book. But there's also the element of his roots growing up in Texas and the upheaval of trying to make it in the minor leagues, both as a player and as a manager, and really trying to make a living when all you know is the game. There's certainly a wry, clever like a fox tone when, you can almost see Gibby telling his story and giving his opinions, which are many and thinly veiled, like he held his press conferences later in his career. In the manager's office, feet up on the desk, holding court. It wasn't always that way, but you could say he has found his voice, and today he will lend his to us.
Yeah, that first time around from, I guess, 04 to 08, I mean, was part of, putting a little bit of personality back into the team. A lot of people, those Jays teams were never able to get to, 90 wins in a playoff spot. And it was always kind of like, we only really feel like a real big boy major league team when, Roy Halladay's on the hill. But they had the guys, Reed Johnson, players, Frank Catalanato, Marco Scutero, that people did like that team. And Gibby, he sometimes, lit the fire. He had 53 ejections as a manager over his 2 stints, and there were sometimes the well publicized, willing to remind a player, hey, someone's got to be in charge here, whether it was Ted Lilly or Shea Hillenbrand or Greg Zahn. So this is real baseball nerd brain candy for us. Obviously, when he had that second stint around, it was you were looking for vibes, and it was completely different. I remember Bob Elliott, the dean of baseball writers in Canada, Gibby's introductory media conference before the 2013 season. They did, Bob's doing his little video, and they did this thing where the camera pulls and there's Gibby just off camera into the shot, and Bob's like, "Oh, what'd you say your name was again?" It was no way I could find this on the internet, but trust me, it happened. So we're getting a chance today to speak with someone who's been part of baseball for for more than 40 years, and we get to do it right before the start of a 2023 season where Major League Baseball's made this whole raft of rule changes. Now, I don't know if any sport has a fan base that gets its back up so much over anything new like baseball does. Like, there's even its own meme for it. You are only a true fan if you hate every rule change made in the last 75 years. It's like the people who watch the Golf Channel just so they can call into the PGA when a player violates a rule.
People do that?
Oh yeah, they do. I remember it being in Sports Illustrated. Anyways, just since we're going to be asking about that, and since maybe people have their minds on other sports right now, just to remind people what some of those rules changes are, and of course, I can't resist saying where I fall on them, because me, I'm on the MLB competitions Slack channel all the time. They want to know what some guy in Hamilton thinks about new rules. I'm sure they do. So obviously, some of the new things. Last year was the first full season where they used the designated hitter in both leagues, and it was about flipping time. Once I had crossed I saw Bartolo Colon swing a bat off the bucket list, I was like, okay, I'm ready to have the DH in all games. The other one, and I've heard Gibby talk about it on his podcast, the Gibby Show, is the ghost runner. They start every extra inning in the regular season only with a runner on second base, just trying to encourage teams to score so you don't end up with like a 20-inning game and then you got to play again the next day. Some people call the extra runner the Manfred Man, and kind of vituperative tribute to Commissioner Rob Manfred. It always gets played up as like, traditional baseball people hate it, real fans hate it. Well, I think I'm a real fan and I actually don't mind it. I would maybe just, have it maybe a little get graduated, maybe started in the 12th inning or something, or maybe factor in how long the game is already gone before you start it. Don't start it right at the 10th. Also new this season in MLB is a pitch clock. And this is something that's been road tested in the minors. The pitcher has 15 seconds to deliver when the bases are empty, 20 when there's a runner. If he doesn't, it's an automatic ball. Batter has to be ready to go with 8 seconds to go. If not, automatic strike. And this has been taking 20 to 30 minutes off of game lengths, which have been trending in the wrong direction for really about the last 30, 40 years. In the last decade, they've been up in the 3-hour range, and not just when it's a Yankees-Red Sox game on Sunday Night Baseball. This is the average of all games. So, this change, it's all about time, and it's about time it happened. Also, every team now, and this one hasn't been talked about, but every team now is going to play every other team in the regular season for the first time. So the Blue Jays will play, the other 14 AL teams like they do, but they'll also be playing all 15 over in the National League, Neil.
So they play every team like in the NHL and in the NBA with half the number of games.
Right. It's something that's brand new, never been done, even though it's been in other sports for 75 to 100 years. But you know what? This is where I'm going to be a bit of a, purist. I'm kind of thumbs down on it. I mean, maybe it's because I'm officially an old and remember when there wasn't any interleague play. Mm-hmm. Personal view is that your fan brain can only keep track of so many opponents, right? Then that's why football is easy to follow. There's one game every week, and I think you repeat a couple of opponents. I think long-term baseball is probably going to go to some sort of east-west realignment, but right now, I mean, that's a lot, and I think it puts a lot on teams that they have to get a read on so many different opponents, right? Anywho, the other two, I don't think they're as big. If you've watched baseball regularly, you probably noticed that fielding shifts were getting more and more extreme. 3 infielders on one side of second base, second baseman going out and standing out in deep right field when a power hitter was up. Can't do that anymore. Now you have to have 2 infielders on each side of second, and they have to be on the dirt portion of the infield. Also, the bases are bigger, which I think will, maybe lead to a few more stolen base tries. And those are the things we're going to ask Gibby about toward the end of the episode, ideally. Nothing too radical, I don't think. It's not like they're taking any suggestions to put in a trampoline out at second base or have a steeplechase water pit in left center field. Maybe next year.
Nate, the purists are going to think these new rule changes are gateway changes.
Baseball sometimes is a bit like a drug to me, Neil.
It is, and it's designed to break your heart. Coming up, Gibby and the Tales of a Baseball Lifer, which will be released on April 4th. Well, we'd like to welcome in both myself and Nate Sager, John Gibbons. Most of our listeners will know exactly who he is. Longtime manager of the Toronto Blue Jays, back-to-back ALCS appearances in 2015 and 16. John, we're going to start off with a question. Normally, I'd ask you how you came to this point and evolved into writing your own book, but it's sort of full circle. How did you come from a mumbling Farmer Fran character, as you describe in the book, to essentially having a weekly podcast called The Gibby Show, as well as your own Twitter account? How much more comfortable are you now that you have control of your own voice rather than answering questions in the media? Sorry, John.
It's funny when you said farmer friend. A couple guys gave me that description, and I had to look it up. I'd watched the movie Waterboy, and I said, "Damn, that is me." I didn't know I sound that bad. But anyway, to answer your question, I really enjoy the podcast. It gives me a chance to reflect, and it's based primarily on the current Blue Jays, and then we bring in some ex-players, and I just enjoy, shooting the bull with these guys and talking about, the season now, or even the older guys that, I manage and things, and kind of reminiscing. I guess you could say I can control the message now. But you know what? I've always believed, you shoot straight, tell the truth. And remember, we're involved in a game, it's not life and death. So we have a little fun with it. So, but I've really enjoyed that. I do miss the field. I miss the competition, all that, but I've kind of enjoyed this podcast a little bit.
Sounded like words from Bud Grant there, remembering, hey, this is entertainment. For our audience up here in Canada, Southern Ontario specifically, where are people going to find you the next month or so as you promote this book?
Well, you know what? I'm coming up there, to the Toronto area a couple times in the month of April, and then I'm going to be heading, all over Canada to do a couple things, some kind of clinic type things, and mixing some book appearances and all that. So it's going to be going to make a big push and see what the heck happens. But after I got fired in 2018, in 2019, I went up there. I did like 4 banquet type things and really loved it. It was a chance for me to, a lot of ways thank the fans, man, for the way they treated me and reconnect a little bit. So I'm looking forward to it. So I guess you could call it a book tour or whatever you want to call it. But I'm actually looking forward to seeing Toronto again and seeing the folks.
You said you're going to do some clinics. So does that go back to your days with the Astros Buddies program?
Hey, you did read the book, man.
It's the motto of our show. You have to read the book. And we did.
Well, at least I know one person reads it. One person, or one person skimmed it. No, you know what? Yeah, when I was a kid, that was I lived in Houston at the time before we moved to San Antonio, and that was like the big deal. He became an Astro buddy. I think they might have put on a couple clinics during the year, and you got to go to a couple games. And one thing it's good to. I enjoy being around the kids and maybe giving them a little advice. You don't get carried away because a lot of times they're real young and, you don't want to overdo it. But it's, that's what the game's all about. We get older in this business, but we're still involved in baseball. But it's still a kid's game and to give back one way or the other. And I do enjoy that. There's no doubt about it. And it keeps you young, it really does.
When was the last time you were in Toronto?
Gosh, when was the last time I was in there? Would it have been
pre-COVID, maybe?
19 when I did. Yeah, would have had to been 19. Yeah.
Oh, so it'll be a homecoming of sorts after a while. I want to ask you about the book in the sense that had you thought? I mean, how recently would you have thought there's no way I'm ever going to have my own book? I mean. It'd be interesting to know how this came to be, and how you partnered with Greg Oliver.
You know what? I originally, in 2018, like that, I tell you when I got fired, the last home game, we announced I was leaving and all that, and I can remember there was 2 or 3 reporters, good reporters that covered us, and just good journalists and whatever you want to call you guys, but it was like. They asked me, he said, if you ever write a book, I want to write it, and I thought, it never even occurred to me. I kind of dismissed and kind of laughed as a joke, and said, heck, I wouldn't even read a book, and that's kind of the way I felt about it. I thought, really? I don't see much success in that. So then a few years passed, and an old buddy of mine, his name's John Arezzi, who's a good friend with, Greg Oliver. Yeah. He had written one, or Greg had written one on him for, on wrestling. He kind of had a crazy career, and he approached me, and I thought, well, let's look into it a little bit. And you know what, believe it or not, once we started it, it was kind of fun to look back over the years and not only not only my career, but growing up a little bit and reflecting. And so I said, well, you know what the heck, I'm going to have fun with it. Nobody may read it, but now if it was a freebie, I wouldn't have done it. You know that, but
yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. We always ask about the business of books too. So I know you've spent a lot of time in the minors, and the value of a buck. So I'm sure you drove a hard bargain with ECW Press on this.
Well, I don't know about that. Rizzy's my agent, man. I don't know. I got to look into some things.
John was your roommate, right? And with JP Ricciardi, is that correct?
Yeah, in 1981, a little town called Shelby, North Carolina, a little redneck town down there in Carolina. We didn't call it Shelby though; we called it Helby. Because I think there was 10,000 or 15,000 people there, and we played on a bad high school field. Not just a high school field, a bad one. But I did 2 tours of duty there, so I paid my dues there. That's for sure.
It's kind of a factor, right? I mean, these people you met earlier on in your career, your long minor league career as a manager and as a player, and now they're kind of like, JP obviously gave you your break, and then John does the podcast with you now, does he not?
Yes, yeah. That's what you always when you meet good friends when you're younger or wherever you're at in life, you never forget them. In the world of baseball, it's like a big fraternity anyway, and everybody recycles, and sooner or later they come across each other, and that's how I got to Toronto, like you said, like with JP, his old roommate, and he brought me there, and of course Arezzi kind of spurred on this book deal here. So yeah, it's kind of funny how the way things work, I'm a Irishman from Texas. Actually, my mom and dad are both from Boston, but
right,
mingling with two hardcore Italians, one from New York, one from Boston. So figure that one out, right?
Yeah, how about it?
John, something in the book that really stuck with me is how you say, as a manager, you never wanted to rush players who lacked experience. And that comes up right after you talk about your time as a 21-year-old rookie catcher with the New York Mets who had injuries. So I have to ask, how would John Gibbons, the manager, have tried to weigh in on the development of John Gibbons, the young catching prospect?
Well, you know what? That's a good question. We always learn from experience, right? We all do. And at the time, I was a first round pick by the Mets, and they were bad up top. They had some big draft picks, and they were trying to turn things around. And so there was opportunities there, right? And I went AA in 1983 and 84. 84 is kind of when things started to change for me, because they started giving younger guys opportunities. So I went to spring training, and they threw the catching job up for grabs, and I ended up winning the job, right? And then I had broke my cheekbone here right a couple of days before we broke camp, and that didn't kill me, but it didn't help me, for a guy that I was scared to death anyway. Here's my opportunity, blah blah blah. So back then they didn't have rehab assignments, right? So it's not like they could send you down for 2 weeks or whatever to get some playing time and get you going. So eventually I got back on the field and really struggled, and then the next thing because I was young, it lost my confidence basically. And everybody and their brothers giving you hitting lessons, right? And so it's almost like you forget how you used to hit. And I was a very coachable guy, and sometimes that can be bad too. You gotta know how to distinguish what you need and what you don't need. So I guess to answer your question, at the time I was the guy. I knew I was the guy. I was ready for it and all that. But looking back, especially after the injury at the end of spring, where I wasn't going to be ready to play for a few weeks, I probably should have started in the minor leagues just to get that little extra seasoning, right? And face some little bit. AA is a good level. A lot of guys go to the big leagues from AA. AAA is a little more polished. You see better pitching as far as skill. They maybe not the better arms, but they better breaking balls and all that. So I could have benefited from that in my mind. Now that I look back, no excuses. But so when I got to the managing job in there in Toronto, it was like, anytime we were talk about a young player, I would always try to weigh the the pros and cons of it. And We broke in, Roberto Osuna, some guys. There wasn't a lot of them, but there were some good young ones and things, so that entered my mind, and I wanted to make sure, because it's not that it ruined my career, but it didn't help. And next thing you know, I disappeared, and I wasn't the first story of that happening too. So you always want to make sure those guys are ready. And then, so it's funny because when I was managing there, when Vladdy, Junior there, there was talk, Anthopoulos, who signed him, was gone, obviously, but there was talk about everybody wanted to bring up Vladdy, and the team stunk at the time. We were all on the way out, and so the kind of people, hey, bring Vladdy up, and then there was a big argument of, well, they can't do it, they don't want to pay the money, blah blah blah, which is a lot of truth to that, no doubt. But I also, I was for it because I want, it wasn't going to make a difference in our season. I want to see the kid play, right? And everything I'd heard, he was ready. But in the back of my mind, I also thought, you know what? This team's doing nothing. Let him get a full season down there, possibly. So I was kind of, I guess you could say I was riding the fence a little bit. It wasn't going to happen. It didn't matter what we thought, right? They weren't going to do that for different reasons. But there is you got to be cautious of that. And you got to make sure the kid is mentally tough, in case, because you're going to struggle, man. You're going to struggle at the top level, especially when you're a young kid. You struggle. The greatest players in the game still struggle,
You briefly, in answering that, mentioned your brief career where you were, first round draft pick, supposed to be the next catcher for the Mets. You played 18 games, 10 in 85 and 8 in 86. And you managed to hit a home run in that time. I was wondering if you could read from the book and describe that what happened in that at bat.
Let's see here. Is that what you just sent me, right? All right.
Yes, sir.
Gary Carter went down on August 16th. He was playing first base, and he dove for a ball and fell in his left hand and broke his thumb. I was called up from Tidewater, backup Ed Hearn. I got in 8 games, and we won them all. That's the important thing. Team wins. If you just looked at my stats, you'd mistakenly think I was one of the best stars. I batted .474 with 9 hits and a homer, my one and only major league dinger. It was special to me in my 4th at bat in the game on September 20th, 1986 against the Phillies at Shea Stadium. Michael Jackson, not the singer. He was pretty good reliever. Anyway, when Carter came back, I was stuck in the bullpen. So in reality, I was a player, but not a player. Most of the guys on the team I had known for years now. So that made everything worthwhile. But it was very frustrating just sitting there watching from the bullpen and then occasionally getting to warm up a pitcher. But I contributed somehow whenever I was called upon. It's hard to become a regular on a major league team, but it's extremely hard on a great team. So I felt lucky too.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, that does that, when you look back on your brief time, I mean, is that do you look back on that home run as kind of something to hold on to in that brief amount of time you were playing in the majors?
Oh yeah, that's a big part, because especially since there's only one of them, it's not like I got a bunch and go, God, which was my favorite, Yeah, you know what, my playing days, everything became frustrating. I was, when they went out and picked up Gary Carter, the fall of '84. So I knew I wasn't going to play then, but I was still so young. They wanted me to go down to the minor leagues to keep playing, right? Which is natural. That's what all organizations do, and it's the right thing to do. And then, but I kind of shifted my thing. Why can't I be the backup? I was good enough to be the backup. I wanted to be in the big leagues, right? Because I got a taste of it. And I was going nowhere as long as Gary was there. Nobody was. And so that became frustrating. Then, then when you get called up and you're basically sitting out in the bullpen as a bullpen catcher, and I thought I was better than that, and I got tired of that, and then I got a little bit of the sour attitude, and so when I got into some games, I tried to take advantage of every shot I got, and like I said, the main thing is we won every game I caught, which is a catcher's job, to work that pitching staff. That's the number one job, and so I'm kind of proud of that. It's not like we didn't have a great team. We're going to win anyway, but I like to think I helped contribute somewhat. But yeah, my career as a player wasn't anything like I dreamed of. And then, of course, I went into coaching, and pretty happy the way that turned out. But Yeah, a lot of frustrations in, but you know what? That's that's life. That's life in professional sports. If you got a superstar playing ahead of you, that's just the breaks, and if you're not always free to go wherever you want,
Well,
so
certainly, it comes across in the book as though you're not one to dwell, but it absolutely. I mean, I think the reader, Nate, may agree with me. Can feel that, wow, like it's gotta, it seems like you handled it well. You didn't internalize it and get really down, at least outwardly.
yeah, no, you know what? I'm no sour grapes. I you know what? You make your own breaks in life, and I had more opportunities if I played a little bit when I went down to the minor leagues. If I played a little better, might have got a shot somewhere else, and then eventually I got traded, and
Hmm.
then it kind of, I felt the end was near. So, uh, but nothing worse than a complainer thinks he's getting screwed all the time, because that wasn't the case at all.
Right.
So,
Eh,
but that's life, man.
and the injury itself, I don't know if I missed it if you were describing, but it was you got a collision at home and it was your cheek. Is that correct?
That was right before. Yeah, it was like 2 or 3 days before the season started, so that put me on the shelf to start the season.
Mm,
And then 2 months in, we were playing in Philly on a cold day, and I was making a throw to second base.
mm.
They were running us wild, right? Whoever was pitching, I don't remember, was slow to the plate. I'm embarrassed. I'm thinking, I can do something about this. When in reality, if the pitcher's slow, you got no shot. So I made an adjustment. I tried to unload the ball quicker on one throw, and so I sidearmed it, and I felt this burn right there through my elbow.
Right.
But then next thing you know, I have a hard time throwing the ball back to the mound. But we were so far behind, they stopped running anyway, so I could get it back to the pitcher. And after the game, I went saw the trainers and said, "Hey, something's wrong, man." And eventually they put me on the disabled list. Eventually they sent me out to Dr. Job, who, was the first guy who did the Tommy John.
Right.
But this was before MRIs, so I went out there and he moved it around, and he said, yeah, I think you got a torn ligament in there. He said, you're going to go back to New York and do these exercises for the next 2 months. Doesn't get any better, you're probably going to need surgery, right? So I'm 21. I'm thinking, great, And so I did all this stuff, the routine, and I went back down to AAA. Was able to, hit because, it came along enough for that. Eventually came back, and I was able to throw. My arm was never the same, but it wasn't something that required surgery,
Right.
But that was the real blow right there,
Right.
But I bounced back from that, but I definitely wasn't the same. But yeah, there was, and I gave it my best, and I feel pretty fortunate. I got some opportunities that a lot of guys never did that should have gotten, and so I've got zero complaints.
Well, given your lengthy time in the minors as a player and manager after that, in the book, you write about this. Perhaps you can explain it further. Once you reach the MLB as a I guess a coach, manager, first base coach, and then manager, how significant was it for you to reach that 10-year pension plan, knowing how long you'd toiled in the minors?
Oh yeah, well, you know what? That's everything in this game. You hear guys talking all the time. What do you got left? 10 years now. So now you're set. You got that retirement for the rest of your life, just like in other jobs, and it's pretty good retirement, obviously, if you look at sports anyway. But it's funny when I first signed, got drafted in '80, I was talking to my scout, and he said, it wasn't long before that you had to have a max pension was 20 years. You had to have 20 years to reach max, right? Now it's 10. And you also had to play, what was it? You had to play, it was either 2 years or 4 years in the league before you even got on the pension plan.
Right.
Now it's just like day one, you get put on it, right? So
Right.
So it's come a long way. And of course, it's more lucrative too than it was in those days. But them old timers, man, did a lot of good things for these youngsters out there now, myself included. And that's why I hate to hear guys bitch and moan about,
Right.
how bad it is, and you're getting paid millions of bucks and it's bad, really, and you're set for life. Yeah,
It's interesting because what I found interesting about it is most people, when they talk about salaries in baseball, they're looking at the Giancarlo Stanton, and the idea of a pension doesn't really seem that significant. But I believe in reading the text of your book, you can see why the pension is important for so many people that we may overlook when we're looking at the top 10 or 15 players and how much money they make.
Yeah, you know what I mean. I think what is it? You know, I broke in. I think the minimum was like 40-something thousand. I mean, you had to make that the minimum, and I think now it's like, was it 600-700 grand? You know, so they're making a good living. But you know, I mean, unless you are around for a while, you're not going to make that kind of money unless you prove yourself and you're good enough. But I mean, so put it this way: if you spend a few years in the big leagues, you should be set pretty good to, you know, that your pension's a bonus, you know. But for a lot of guys and a lot of coaches, a lot of struggling guys that, you know, were never really made it, you know, they got a cup of coffee, you know, every so often. You know, it goes a long way. It's like any profession, right? You know, that you know, get a job that's got a nice retirement plan.
Yeah,
that's big, you know.
for sure.
Yeah, just to give an idea to the reader of how things used to be, I remember your fellow Texan, Nolan Ryan, saying his only goal was, when he started it, was to play long enough to get on the pension plan, to get the 4 years. And I think Satchel Paige, Atlanta put him on their roster when he was 62 years old to get him to the pension. And back when there was the 81 baseball strike, I believe Mookie Wilson took a job at a seafood place just to pay the bills until the players came back.
Yeah, you know what I used to, when I first got into it and go to spring training, you hear a lot of the old timers would be around and talking, and you know, spring training is so different now. You know, these guys are, you know, they train all winter and they come to spring training, they're ready to go. You know, spring training is almost a letdown for them, right? But it used to be back then, they used to go to spring training to get in shape, you know, because they had to work during the off season, you know?
Right.
You know, it wasn't, so it's changed so much. Those guys did so many good things for, you know, for the game, for the players, and sometimes they don't get enough, you know, or they don't get enough recognition for it, you know, and I think people take things for granted, but those guys went out and striked and made no money and sacrificed, and so that's why the game's so lucrative, you know.
Mm-hmm. And you know, and speaking of sacrificing, no, I'm not asking about bunting, but one bit of wisdom I've retained in my life is, you know, sometimes you do the wrong job to get the right one. To what extent was that true of you becoming the Blue Jays bullpen catcher when you were 39? Because it's usually a 20-something's job.
Yeah, exactly. You know, well, you know what happened in, you know, I've been in the Mets, you know, farm system managing. I had been in AAA for 3 years, you know.
Someone's ringing.
Somebody.
All right.
You
Sorry.
still there?
Yeah.
No,
Oh, yeah.
I need to apologize. No, so, you know, I was in the AAA there. Bobby Valentine was managing the big league club, right? And they would go through coaches every year. It's like, I mean, you know, there'd be a turnover. At least one coach, you know. I don't know if nobody could get along with him or what it was, but so I was in AAA and for 3 years, and the team success, and you know, some players came through there, and what normally happens is the AAA manager sooner or later just slides in, you know, because he's at the top level. They like, you know, to manage in AAA, the organization's got to like you and trust you, because that's, you know, the step below. You know, next thing you know, this guy's in the big leagues, so they want somebody there that they can trust and knows what they're doing. And so anyway, so jobs kept coming open, and you know, I kept getting passed up, and you know, so be it, no big deal. You know, I knew Valentine, but we never really hit it off. But I don't know if that had anything to do with it. But then, so I you know, I've got children now. I got 3 kids. I was looking to get a job closer to home, you know, for their sake, you know, and so Billy Bean, you know, was the fair hair boy out there in Oakland, you know, money baller. He, you know, he'd always told me we're pretty good buddies. We lived together, and we got drafted the same year and all that. He said, if you ever want to come out here in Oakland and need a job out here, let me know, right? But they were really good at the time. They were winning. They had no money, none anything. So they really could. So I thought that was my ace in the hole, right? You know, I didn't even check. But I thought, well, he said that, so I'm gonna, you know, I got it there, right? So next thing you know, I walk away from the Mets. You know, when I didn't get the third base coaching job was open, so I didn't get it. I said, you know what, that's writing on the wall. I gotta take care of my family now, finally.
Right.
So I walked, figuring I had a job in Oakland. Then I get a hold of Beaner. They don't have anything open. You know, they're really playing well. They got no excess money, and I didn't have to have a big league job. I was just looking for a job, but they didn't have anything. So J.P. Ricciardi was, Bean's right-hand man, right? And so he started helping me trying to find a job. And he's calling around other places. And so one day I called Billy Bean, and he said, "Let me call you back. JP's got a press conference." I go, "What the heck?" So then that's the day he got hired by the Blue Jays. And so then, a few days later, he called me and I said, "I got a job for sure, man. He's been helping me try to find one. Now he's in that position. He can give me something, right?" So he said, "The big leagues, we got the third base coaching job open, and we got the bullpen catchers." He said, "Come on up for an interview." So I went up and interviewed, and then Carlos Tosca got the third base job. So he said, "You want the bullpen coaching job?" I said, no chance, man. I did that my whole career. Plus I hadn't squatted in 10 years. I said, physically, I don't think I could do it. And so we just bought a new home. I got three young kids, and I'm thinking my contract, they renew, or they go from January to January, and
1-year deals.
So mine's about to run out, and I got no job. I got a house payment. I got 3 kids. So I called him back, said, "I'll take it," And,
Wow.
it wasn't like I was dying to do it, and it was my ticket. It was because I have responsibilities, man. I got to pay some bills. I got my kids. I got this and that, and I always, I did think, what, it's my, at the games, it's all, like most things, relationships, and I thought he'll take care of me sooner or later if something opens up, right? But there's no guarantees. But I needed a job. That's basically what it was, and so I went up there and did it. Blew out my knee the first day I was squatting. So it's like, oh gosh. And then, of course, he made some changes, fired Buck Martinez on June 1st, I think it was, and put me out of the field. So
Isn't that interesting though? How it's almost the reversal of what happened in the minors. Like you come up there as like Nate said, maybe taking the wrong job to get the right one, and then all of a sudden these breaks happen, quite quickly. In that Buck Martinez is fired, and then I believe it was Carlos Tosca was fired. And each time,
yes,
that helped you get to where you finally reached the mountaintop and became the manager.
Yeah, you know what? You never, somebody's got to like you. That's like in anything, I keep saying that, but that's the truth. And you got to have your sponsors out there. And JP, he got the perfect job, was able to help me out, and we went, we were old roommates, and we, good friends. So naturally, that it didn't guarantee me anything, but, I knew he was going to probably take care of me. And then he thought he was a good enough baseball guy that he would give me that job. And things were really volatile back then in Toronto, with the team, that's when the Yankees and the Red Sox are really, at their prime, right?
Right.
So yeah, we were average Joes, and us and the other 3 teams were going to be out of it by the end of May, probably. The Red Sox, Yankees were running away with it. So that was kind of the atmosphere. It was, optimism, but in reality, right? So there was a lot of turnover, a lot of change, trying to compete,
Yeah, I can remember the site Deadspin one year when you were in your first tenure, they had me write the Blue Jays preview, and the first comment was, "Next time, can you get this written by someone who isn't a depressed drunk?" Because that's how I came off in the article. Just because there was like, yeah, well, I'm like, they'll win their 86 games. We'll have our optimism, but we know where the Yankees and Red Sox are running this. But I wanted to move ahead to the second time you were with the Blue Jays, 15 and 16. I think I'm over the 2015 ALCS against Kansas City. I'm never going to get over 1985. But how should Blue Jays fans view those years? They were right there at the mountaintop, and of course the fact that right after the first trip, Alex Anthopoulos, was the general manager, the architect, just kind of leaves in what people thought was kind of rather abrupt.
Well, you know what?
Yes, Gibby, tell us.
Yeah, you know what? It had been so long. Like 22. What was it? 22, 23 years. One of those.
Yeah.
Too long, whatever it was, since the last postseason appearance. And so the fact that finally get back there. We had we were basically 500 until Alex made those great trades, right? And then I think the key was our defense. We were the best hitting team in the league, right? We could score with anybody. Pitching was solid enough, but we were bad defensively. we're playing guys out of position, and Reyes at shortstop. He had lost his range. He's older. He tried, but that's the way it was. So when he finally when Alex picked up Tulowitzki, it made all the difference in the world. And then Ben Revere, short up left field. So now we were a good defense. Now we had everything, right? And then of course David Price, and it's like, now hey, the GM's going to step up, give these guys a chance. Because the year before, if you remember right, we were basically in the same ideal spot. We were down at the trade deadline, and we didn't do a thing. There was no money to do anything, right? And so then you had Batista, and I think it was Casey Jansen was our closer. They came out and said, they popped off, saying, well, it was kind of a shot across the bow at the front office, right?
Right.
But then the following year, Alex kept some money, in place just in case that came up again. And sure enough, it was almost identical, right? But it just shows you, you have to be a complete team. You can't, if you're a bad defensive team, you can't overcome that, So now he's got some money. He was able to, pick up Price, the remainder of his contract. And then, Tulowitzki and Reyes was basically a wash. So now, and then it was like a light switch, man. There was there was enthusiasm, and the players going, hey, we're serious. Look at all this. And then we played good. The fans, they were the same way. So anyway, we took off like gangbusters. You guys know the story. And
right.
We get there, and then we almost bow out quick. But there was never panic. Never. And the guys bounced back and won 3 straight. And the thing about that was a year I thought we could have won it. Kansas City was good, there's no doubt. Different type of game. And they go on to win it all. 16 we were we probably pitched a little better. Offense wasn't as strong. That's just the way it is. Some years are like that. But we got to the same spot. We came up short, but I think the fans they ought to. I think they appreciate that year, obviously because it had been so long, so they're going to remember the guys for that. But I think that group of guys, those couple of years, and there was something about them. There was big personalities. They were fun to watch. They were volatile. They were a good team. They weren't a boring team.
No.
Yeah. And I think that's part of it. It's kind of the bad guys. Even around the league. Because we had some. The Donaldson and Batista, they weren't well liked in the game, It's because they were so good, MVP type players. And you know what? They would voice their opinion, and then so that would rile up the other side and everything like that. So, but yeah, we provided some pretty good entertainment. We didn't win it all. We got close, but I think and then of course the drama of, Jose's, bat flip, to come back and win that series. There's just so many good things that happened that I think people will remember that in a good way, even though it came up short. And it was, like I said, it had been 22 or 23 years. So I ought to know that, but I don't.
You're an old school guy, so I know you didn't see the bat flip, but there's different opinions on it. What are your thoughts? I know it was your guy, so that may sway it, but given who you are, the type of guy you are, what do you think of that showmanship?
Well, yeah, I'm definitely old school. I don't like a lot of that stuff, but in that moment, I got no problem. If somebody for Texas had done that, and you consider everything, in the playoff game, I would have zero in the emotion, right?
Right.
I wouldn't have a problem with that, And the funny part about, Texas celebrate more than anybody. They'd hot dog it more than anybody. So it was kind of. Of course, then it culminated the following year with the Odor and Hosey. But I was looking at some stat sheets or something. I was thinking about what's next, and then he hit the ball, and I'm watching the ball, make sure that thing gets out. Of course, in the meantime, he flips that baby. But I heard the roar. I know that. I felt the roar.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I know we're running thin on time. I would have asked you about that. I think it's a 43-minute inning. Or is it 53?
Oh, yeah, man.
But yeah, I guess my big question, and I'm going to lay it right out, and this applies to you too, and I'm going to preface this with #trialballoon. And the question is, it's the biggest questions I've had that I don't think has been answered. And I think I know the answer, but why does Alex leave? Why is he allowed to leave, given that we know the success he created? He was young, and even if he'd emptied the system, why don't you keep a guy like that around? Can we lay this straight at the feet of corporate ownership?
No, because they tried to they came back at him and offered more. I think what happened, with Beeston leaving, that was kind of a cluster the way all that happened, right? And then Shapiro's coming in, and so it's going to be a little different relationship for Alex. Mark's more of in controlling, doing a lot of the baseball stuff where Beeston wasn't. Beeston was running the business end of it. Of course, he would have to sign off on the deals or whatever Alex wanted to do. But Beeston's philosophy was this: listen, I hired you, Alex, or whoever GM was, to run this, put a team together. These are our budgets, whatever. Put a team together. Let me know about it. But that's your job, right? And I'll hold you accountable, right? The way it ought to be. And then the GM, Beeston, what I thought, you hire the manager, you hold him accountable. So he wasn't getting involved in the baseball decisions, or he wasn't, that kind of guy. Where Shapiro coming in, he was more that kind of guy. That's kind of the way the younger guys are doing it now. And so I think Alex felt that he wasn't going to, well, I know he felt it was going to be a different relationship, and he probably wouldn't have the autonomy that he had under Beeston. And because, the ownership, now they came at him, pretty hard to, keep him around. So they wasn't, you can't blame them, but, it turned out to be a great move for him. I think it's a shame because he's Canadian born, and he did such a great job, and he's a great baseball guy. But he turned out, he keeps proving how good he is, what he's done there in Atlanta. He'll tell you himself that he inherited a great system down there. But even though when you say, he left the cupboards bare, look at that team now, you got Danny, you got Vladdy Jr., you got Romano. Those all came from that time, from Alex and those guys. So it's not like and you look at all the guys he traded for those guys, I don't think any of them really panned out, have much of a career,
Yeah, well, I don't know. I know, I don't think everyone, thank you for your answer, but for me as a journalist, it doesn't smell right. I mean, the guy goes on to have success with the Dodgers, wins a World Series there. I think he was an assistant GM. He, whether he inherits the farm system or not, wins a World Series with Atlanta. I don't know. For me, it seems like the perfect fit was here, and
there's no doubt. There's no doubt. Now, so what don't you agree with? You don't think he?
Maybe like you're saying, I don't know the nuts and bolts of what management offered him, and maybe Rogers is an easy target. I'm not sure, but I mean, I imagine if you two had stayed together, perhaps they could have continued something. I don't know.
I agree with that. But I'm going to tell you, they came back at him and offered. But you can't end up paying him more than you pay the president you just brought in. That ain't going to happen. So maybe we'll take that for what it's worth.
All right. Yeah. All right, I respect that. Okay, that's good. Nate has sorry.
That was a hard day, obviously, when AA left. But the hardest day for me as a lifelong Blue Jays fan was November 7, 2017. Roy Halladay, of course. In the book, you sort of write that Roy was tough to get to know, but knowing how hard he worked and the struggles he had early in his career. What do you think he could have done in his second baseball life with helping pitchers?
When I say he was tough to get to know, Roy was an introvert, and he'd come by the office or be walking by the office, and I'd see him walking down the hall, and I'd holler at him. He'd come in and we'd talk, about life, his family, and all that, baseball, obviously. But he wasn't an outgoing guy that's going to sit down and talk with everybody all the time. That's just not who he was, right? He was very serious about his career, what he wanted to accomplish. He'd been, he got there fast, and had great success early on, and then then he gets knocked down, and the story goes back down to A-ball and resurrects himself, and then then of course the tragedy that happened, but. He reinvented himself he just learned who he was and how to pitch and perfected what he was doing. He at first he was a sinker baller, curveballer, right? Then he became he was a sinker ball, and then he started throwing the cut fastball, And that was his bread and butter. That's what, that was Mariano Rivera's. That's the only pitch he ever threw. So Roy mastered that, and he mix in a breaking ball every now and then to perfection, just like Mariano did. And that's what really set him off. And then the confidence grew. And he's a big, strong guy, he was a pleasure to be around. I mean, you wouldn't know he was around. That's for sure. But he was very professional. He was a manager's dream. He, it wasn't easy taking him out of the games. I tell you, he'd look at you, but he wasn't, and you go, damn, he's looking. I don't think he wants out of this game, right? And sometimes you got to do it, but he would never pop off at you, or he would never badmouth you. He might come by.
Sorry, go ahead.
He might come by the office and talk about it. But, I've had guys too that complain and bitch and moan, and then you got to, undress them a little bit. But, he was a manager's dream, just like Mark Burley, in a different type of pitcher. And so Roy, and it's so sad, what happened to Roy. But he left his mark on a lot of people, not just in the game of baseball, in life, and one of the all-time great people.
Nate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, Mark Burley and Roy Halladay were both renowned for working quickly. I got to ask about the pitch clock coming in. Someone put me up to asking this. How long will it be before we see a pitcher who gets ahead 0-2, like take an intentional ball just to ramp up to throw strike three? And I imagine some guy on Tampa Bay will be ordered to do it. So I just wanted to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen? I kind of. I get it. Just there's two examples you gave, Halladay and Burley. If you work quicker, most guys, you're better, right? Some guys can't do that. Some guys need to take time. That's just the way it is, for whatever reason. They got to breathe. They got to think about it, whatever. What was it? Luck LaLoosh, breathe through your eyelids or something, and Bull Durham. Anyway, so, that's just the way it is, so to speed it up, I guess, to get the games moving quicker. They say, well, the games are actually quicker in spring training. Spring training games move quicker anyway because nobody's really the hitters don't have their timing. Innings are quicker, blah blah blah. That kind of thing. So that's probably misleading. You'll have to find out during the season. But the part of the game that I'm worried about, you get late in the game with some of your top relievers, right? With the game on the line, the last couple innings, and close ball games, there's everything's riding on one pitch most of the time, and so you see a lot of stepping off, trying to make sure they get on the same wavelength with the catcher. And I'd hate to see somebody get penalized or somebody walk in a run or something like that, or a hitter get struck out because he because that's kind of the dramatic moments in ball games, right? And when there's drama, people get caught up in the emotion, and it can be slow and methodical and all that. And I just hope it doesn't affect the game. It's kind of like it's when when they changed the slide rule at home plate and then at second base, it's like, what are we doing? It's not like guys get hurt all the time, right? But when you have to make a play at the plate, a judgment call, or you got to give him a certain amount to slide and all that. You're asking for trouble, man. What if you end up in the seventh game of World Series on somebody, you got to send it to New York to decide, hey, did the catcher give him enough room to slide? And that's a winning run in the World Series. Come on. I mean, guys, if you don't want your catcher to get hurt, your guy, if your guy's a superstar, tell him don't block the plate. But on this other team, the guy, that's the way a guy makes a living. Block the plate. It's not that difficult. But I think we got overly protective, like guys get hurt all the time, and it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, sometimes there's an overcorrection, and I've had that vision too of eighth, ninth inning of a postseason game, and wondering, well, maybe you put some more time on the clock, maybe you waive it if there's runners on base, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Hey, real quick though, what I can't understand, we talk about these rule changes like that ghost runner at second base, you go extra innings. They do it during the season, but not in the playoffs, right? I guess. Why in a major league season would you do something different than you?
Well, it's like the shootout. It's like a shootout in hockey.
Yeah, right? Exactly. But that's like Little League, man. That's what we do in Little League. If anything, put the guy on first base, second base. It's like because so much of the game, teams that win it in the end, right? They grind it out, they win their division. That's a feat in itself right there. So part of that is the teams with the best depth in the organization. So when you have these long extra inning games, you have to use your guys in the minor leagues. You got to, and some teams have better strategy. They're better equipped for that. So they should be rewarded because they've done things better. I just don't get it. And there's another thing real quick. If you guys got a second,
we got all the time in the world. We're just worried about your time. No,
don't worry about me. But it was somebody. I was talking to somebody not too long ago, and we were talking about like Albert Pujols, right?
Yeah.
He went down. He hit his 600. What did he hit?
700.
700. I had Albert in the Arizona Fall League before he ever made the big leagues. I didn't know he was going to do that. I knew he was going to be good, but I didn't think he'd do that. But okay, say he's coming down to the wire, right? And he comes up one home run short. You go back and you look and say, when he finally got to St. Louis, they played 5 extra inning games in in the month of September, whatever it was, and with that new rule, they only went 10 innings because the other team won. If you stretch out a long game, a few more innings, Albert might have got a few more at bats, which is the way the game's been historically for
Mm-hmm.
And he might have hit that 700. Obviously he did, but you know what I'm saying?
Right.
We start tinkering with rules and things like that. Baseball is such a numbers game. You look at the records and things like that. I think just get out of the way. My view is if you think the game's too slow, and it can be, go home early, man, and turn your TV off. But but nobody ever complains about 10-9 games, right? They love the offense, right?
Right.
And those games are just as long as some of those duds. So I don't know.
Yeah, and speaking of numbers, and Neil, we're going to have one last manager question in before the lightning round. One change that I don't think has been discussed enough this spring. Every team plays everyone. I just wonder, from your view as a manager, how much extra challenge does that create? Do you have to develop a read on 29 different opponents instead of the 19 or 20 that a team would have faced with the old schedule?
Well, I think the important, and I've been screaming about this for years, not to the commissioner, but to people best. You gotta, when you got wild card teams now, you gotta have a balanced schedule. You can't, because the Blue Jays are the toughest division in baseball, the American League, hands down, no question about it. Now the National League East is really strong. But it's been that way forever, basically, or at least the last 20 years, the American League East. So if you're playing those teams, the top teams in the game, 17, 18 times, whatever the heck it is, and you're playing in the other guys in the Patsy division, let's say,
either Central,
guys, in their division 17, 18 times, and you're a pretty good team. There's nothing fair about that. You're not going to get a true read on a wild card, so you need some kind of a balanced schedule. Now, if it's just division winners like it used to be, they go to the playoffs. Okay, it doesn't matter. The more you play in your division, you get that's now you find out who's the best team. But if you want to be fair, you got to play balanced schedule and play play that Central in a down year like this last year a few more times instead of playing the freaking Yankees. Even a good example last year, which is unbelievable. What was the Blue Jays record against the Red Sox? It was like 16-2. It was so unbelievable, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I know they scored 29 runs in one game.
Yeah, it is, but the record was that just doesn't happen because it's the Red Sox. But there's that if you're that other team, and you lose, one team just dominates you like that, you're probably not very good anyway. But that totally wipes you out of any wild card race. And
right.
For a while, the Red Sox, up a little bit after the All-Star break, they were still in that thing. They just couldn't win in their own division. They won plenty in the other divisions, but so that's kind of my point,
Okay, Nate, did you have one more? Or are we going to go to
the
lightning round?
Okay, we can go. Bring on the lightning round.
First of all, Gibby, I want to thank you so much for the time you've given us, and also, hey, you know what? And it's I can see you love talking ball. I'm surprised you're not going to be out there managing a game sometime soon. The way you're answering Nate's questions.
What kind of stuff?
Yeah, you mentioned you had an opportunity, right? But you decided you didn't want to go overseas. Was that? I feel like I read that.
In Japan?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that was, I interviewed a few times over here and I thought maybe I have a shot, but nothing materialized. And then a buddy of mine, Trey Hillman, who used to manage over in Japan and Korea, I was his bench coach in Kansas City when I first went over there. And he said, they're looking for a manager. He'd throw my name in there if I had any interest. And I said, no, I don't want, I don't want to go that far away. No chance,
All right. So, well, it seems like you've carved out a pretty good niche, with your voice, which is, I don't think anyone would have ever thought back in the day when you first got here. So here, we're going to start with a few quick questions. Sorry, go ahead. Okay. I want you to answer or guess what former New York Mets teammate said the following, quote, Gibby is a good baseball man, and he has always been a good baseball man. He had a great career till he got injured, and I'm sure he looks back on it. I know I do, because I know the type of player he was. He can be a little edgy sometimes, but that's just Gibby.
What New York Mets player said that? Was that JP?
Nope.
Mo Rubin?
I'll give you one more.
Gosh.
Which hitting outfielder?
Was it Mookie?
Yeah. Nice. Thanks,
Mookie
Nate.
Wilson?
Yeah, Mookie Wilson. I just like the back end of that, especially. He can be a little edgy sometimes, but that's just Gibby. I was 53 ejections you had there to lead the Jays in that department. So that
Mook, an ex Blue Jay himself, Mook.
That's right, the spark plug.
Hey, Mook, what an interesting guy, Mookie. Great guy.
Yeah, I know he had managed a little too in the minors, and he was looking for a shot. This is way back. This quote is from 2014. So, but I know he had been looking for to move up into the majors. I'm not sure where that stands now. Nate, you have a question.
Yeah, where do you hope to be when the Minnesota Vikings finally win the Super Bowl?
Oh gosh, I'm not a Vikings guy anymore. I'm a Cowboys guy.
Oh no,
you switched. You switched.
I was going to ask about that. I was just like, how do you be a Vikings fan and growing up in Texas in the 70s?
Well, you know what happened? My dad was in the military, right? The U.S. Air Force, and we were stationed down in Puerto Rico, Ramey Air Force Base. And our next door neighbor, the woman that lived there, brother was Mick Tingelhoff.
Right.
It was the center for the Vikings. He went into the Hall of Fame, NFL Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I think he passed away a couple years ago. So Mick came down a couple years during the off season, see his sister and hang out in Puerto Rico, right? So I got to meet him. I was a young kid, but my dad kind of filled me in on who he was, and he was very nice. And so that kind of started me on, I thought, I'm going to start sending, try to get some Vikings. That became my team because of that, right? Mm. And because I didn't have a team before that. And I'd send letters to guys on their team. You'd be amazed how many they send back pictures, autographed pictures. And I thought, wow, isn't that cool? So that was definitely my team, But then, like you said, Bud just passed away, didn't he, just recently?
Yeah, last weekend, I believe, yeah.
Yeah. And Arash Madani, by any chance? Arash?
No,
yeah,
I know of him,
we go way back with Arash because I guess when Neil and I were at Queen's University in Kingston, Arash was the play-by-play guy for one of their football teams, the other football teams in our conference, the Bishop Skaters, who, by the way,
I figured he'd be a tennis. He'd be coming to tennis. But anyway, Arash's favorite team. He's a Viking nut, man.
We're and so am I.
Yeah, he's a big Vikings fan.
Well, they're pretty good, man. I mean, they're right there every year. Gosh, what was it 4? They were just like the Bills, wasn't it? 0 for 4.
Yeah. The literal day, the Vikings' last Super Bowl appearance was the day my parents brought me home from the hospital when I was 5 days old. I'm not kidding, making that up. Who had nicer cologne though, Gustavo Chassin or Josh Donaldson?
Oh gosh. Actually, Josh was lying. I never smelt it. But he smelt my BO. I'll tell you that. Now, yeah, remember when Gustavo? Remember they came out with it. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, Gustavo.
I gotta go with Gustavo's.
Go ahead.
Hey, Gustavo. All right, Chassin, man.
Gustavo had Gustavo. That was a promotion on the Fan 590 between I think Gord Stellick and Don Landry, who are, I think, host of the morning show, and they said his last name sounds like cologne. So they actually, I think might have given away bottles of Chassin cologne.
That's right.
Who is Gil Mascaris?
Who?
Gil Mascaris. And he, I believe.
Oh,
yeah.
Bill Mascaris, the wrestler.
Yes.
Yes. Wrestler. Yeah. Mexican wrestler. Yeah. I think he might have been one of the first masked ones.
Yeah.
But, I grew up like a lot of kids and loving wrestling. My dad took me to see, it was a heavyweight championship. Well, not heavyweight. Championship fight was Terry Funk versus Wahoo McDaniel. Hey, Wahoo McDaniel. Well, no, he was Kansas City Chiefs.
Right.
It was that Ernie Ladd. They were wrestlers and football players.
Right.
But and so I love wrestling. So I'd come home every Saturday night if I'd go on a date in high school and watch wrestling. But when I was younger, Bill Mascaris, he was the I really liked him, because of the mask. And we used to go down to the border. Texas border. You ain't going now, I'll tell you that. But and we used to go shopping down there, right? And you could barter. My parents would barter with the people. We'd buy some pretty cool stuff. But they had a mask, one of the masks style that he wore. So my parents bought me that, and I'd wear that thing around, and yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
The luchador mask, and I assume Greg Oliver, who's a wrestling nut and columnist, probably his eyes lit up when you mentioned that, and that's why it's in the book.
Oh yeah, well yeah, he had no choice, man. I wrote it.
That's true. There you go. Nate, go ahead.
Yeah. Now I know from being a Gibby Show listener that you and your wife Christi, you've gone and stalked buffalo and snowy owls. Any idea what she has planned for your next sort of wilderness adventure?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Well, she really wants to go see the polar bears. You can go up there and
Thompson, Manitoba.
Churchill. Yeah,
Churchill. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you fly right out of. I guess you fly out of Winnipeg, and that's kind of like the next spot we really want to go to. But Canada, as far as wildlife, is unbelievable. But we went out to Yellowstone for the first time. People recommended it. This was, I think it was last May, and we ended up going up 5 times because we fell in love with the place. We even put a bid on a piece of property to buy and move out there because I was born in Montana. For some reason, I thought maybe I need to go back, but we didn't get the piece. We didn't get the piece of property, but so I think that's probably what she wants to do next. And I'm kind of along for the ride a lot of times. This is my second wife. We just got married 3 years ago, and she's a really good, nice photographer, and I just like to go and drive her around. When we're in Yellowstone and drop her off, and she shoots the bears and the wolves and all that stuff. Nice. And I hide in the car, man.
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, when you said Yellowstone, I thought of Kevin Costner's TV show, and of course, you kind of referenced Crash Davis and Bull Durham, and the line I always quote from him saying to Nuclear Lucius, strikeouts are boring. Throw some ground balls. That's more democratic. That's probably.
Yeah. How about the game nowadays? Gosh, dog it. Strikes. It used to be strikeouts when I was coming up as a player. They were frowned upon, man. If you struck out too much, they got rid of you, man. They didn't think you could hit, And then, nowadays that's like no big deal. Everybody strikes out.
Well, you mentioned your travels, John, and we look forward to your next travels back to Canada, back to Toronto. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of people very interested in this. The Blue Jays have always had the caravan back in the days, and fans across the country, as you know, I think you'll be seeing a lot of people and a lot of smiling faces. Thank you for sharing this much time with us today on SportsLit.
Hey, thank you guys, man. I appreciate your professionalism. I had a lot of fun, and I look forward to getting back there. I miss the people up there. They for whatever reason, they were really good to me. Maybe undeservingly so, but they.
No way.
They appreciate
me. We appreciate your candor and how forthcoming you are and you have been. So thank you again.
Likewise. Hey, thank you guys. Anytime. Let me know.